I'd like to thank the traveling team from St. Louis for coming. We're looking forward to y'all's presentation shortly. The first matter that we need to discuss as a committee are our future meeting schedule. Need to determine, I guess, what works best for everyone. It seems like this Wednesday at 2 o'clock is a good option, but do we want to, what regularity would we like to meet? And then, does this time work for everyone, this day work for everyone? So we'll entertain any thoughts or ideas on the meeting schedule and how often we need to meet. My personal opinion is I think once a month is manageable. As we get into the summer months, every other week may be difficult with everyone's travel schedule, so we want to be considerate of that. But otherwise, I'm open to what the group would like to do as far as our regular rotation.
Josh?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm on a couple of boards that have a monthly standing meeting, and then if they need to meet specially, it's easy to schedule something around a particular topic or issue or something. So I think that usually works for people's regular calendars to have that standing monthly meeting.
Okay.
I have a monthly standing meeting on Wednesdays at this time,
Okay.
from 2 to 3, and I had to inform them that I had to be here today, and they weren't very happy.
Is it
But
the third Wednesday?
it's the third Wednesday of every month,
How about
so
the second Wednesday?
I'm free.
The second would
Yeah.
be, okay.
Yeah, that works. I have
Getting-
a standing meeting on the first Wednesday, so.
Okay. So I'm getting a bunch of thumbs up on the second Wednesday, 2 to 4. Okay. Mr. Davis, does that work for you and your team?
Yeah, that's actually fine. I think the only thing I want to mention is I'm going to ask folks to make a commitment to go through the materials in between meetings because we've got a lot to cover, particularly between now and November. So that's the only thing I would say to that.
Okay. Do we need to entertain a motion to have the second Wednesday of every month be our standing meeting?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. A call for a vote. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Next issue will be our bylaws. We should all have a copy in front of us. This is an item that's a little dense, and I want to introduce it and allow Mr. Davis an opportunity to talk about it. But for the purposes of this meeting, I think this would be best discussed as we've had time to digest the material and be a agenda item for our first meeting starting,
May?
the second Tuesday. Thank you.
Wednesday. Second Wednesday.
Yes, sorry. I am all over the place here. Mr. Davis, would you like to talk about the bylaws and what we need to be paying attention to?
Sure. I think the only thing that folks really need to pay attention to are the highlighted items. I'm assuming everybody got a color copy, which have to do with when alternate meetings can be scheduled, how long things have to be offered before they are placed on the agenda. And I thought there was one more, maybe not. No, I think those are the only two items. Other than that, they're pretty standard for most county boards. And just make sure you offer suggestions if you think there's something that needs to be in here or something that needs to be taken out.
Thank you. Moving on, trying to make up for time here. Ms. Hunter, do you want to discuss the community survey?
Yes. We all received a copy of the community surveys, really easy to use, the QR code on the back. They gave out some flyers at our last meeting here. If we can just, and there's also a link to it on the Charleston County Facebook page as well. If you could share that amongst yourselves and your networks, we really need that feedback to come back so that we know what the community is looking for, and we can use that to engage our efforts as we move forward.
Is there a deadline for when I was passing out the postcards? That was a question I was getting. When do you need them? So there's nothing on the postcard to say.
It's going to be open for at least 3 more weeks. We intended to only have it out for 3 weeks, but because things have been changing so rapidly, we had to extend it. I think the only thing I want to bring up is there are parts of the county that we've been informed lately simply are not going to respond to a digital survey. So we are making an effort to have printed surveys, and if folks can just help us to get those where they need to be so we can have folks fill them out, and we'll have to input them, using staff. But any place where you think a digital survey is not going to be effective, we would like to know.
So then you'll send us a PDF version or something we could print out?
Or we'll arrange to have them there.
Great.
Okay,
That's all.
thank you. Next, I would like to say this is a public meeting. I don't see any members of the public here, but because we are receiving a presentation, we'd like to hold public comment till the end because we feel like a lot of the questions may be answered by the panelists during their presentation. As the presentation goes, if you have questions, just make sure that your mic is lit up so that is captured and that we are observing Robert's rules and asking questions in an orderly manner. Without further ado, the main piece that we're here today, Mr. Carney and Ms. Keller, if you would like to begin your presentation. Thank you for coming all this way.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's great to see you all in person. It was great to be able to connect virtually last time for that first meeting, kickoff meeting, get things going, but you all look really small on a Zoom window. So I really appreciate that we're able to be here this week. I was telling Josh that we've got quite the itinerary this week. We met with a handful of mayors this morning. In sort of our ongoing effort to meet all of the mayors and kind of get that municipal input from throughout the county. We have you all this afternoon. We have a kind of a meet and greet drop-in event at the chamber tonight. We're going to be finishing up our tour and presenting to the housing subcommittee of council tomorrow. So we've feel like we're when we're here we fill our days, and we appreciate the opportunity to present to you all and to continue this conversation. So a couple of things. We've got a hefty presentation that's going to be coming at you, and there's going to be a lot of data. And we've actually pared it down. What we're trying to do is really give you, as best we can, the essence of the analysis and the conversations and the research that we've been doing for the last 4 months to give you as comprehensive a sense without diving into all of the weeds of what are the main issues that are really impacting housing in Charleston County. You're by no means going to see all of the analysis we've done or even all of the different nuances of all of the analysis that we've done. We could probably engage you for a couple of hours every day this week with a lunch break and a couple hours more every day kind of thing if we were going to do that. So I encourage you, we're going to do our best to really kind of tell a story with the data. And highlight what's driving the issues and what are the issues, the opportunities and challenges that are out there. Going to have our conversation, and our conversation really will be designed for you to ask questions. We have a lot more analysis that we're not going to show you. We can dive into the weeds a little bit, time permitting. But I will tell you all that you will be getting the full slide deck and we'll call it an annotated slide deck, so that you'll see, we will highlight and narrate the data in the slide deck, and you'll be getting all of that from us here in the next week or two after this presentation. So that's just kind of a preamble of what we're going to try and accomplish today. I bring up the slide here not to go over it again, but to let you know where we are. We are straddling step 2 and step 3. We have really done our understanding, our quantifying, our analyzing of the information, and we're moving into a synthesis of all of this into that strategy phase. So today you will see that. You've got a worksheet in front of you I'll talk about in just a minute that's really going to try and move us towards that strategy phase that we'll be working on for the next few months. So just real quickly, I think to introduce that strategy phase before we get into the analysis, these are some of the questions as we move into step 3 that we're going to be asking. What are the full slate of options to consider? We've talked about housing, there's ownership, there's renter, there's the full options along an income spectrum, the different construction, rehabilitation. There's going to be a lot of different ways we can look at this issue of housing. So what is that full slate of options? What do we think? And by we, I mean us as the consultants, you as the steering committee, the conversations with Daryl and his staff. What are we looking at that we think collectively could really move the needle on this issue of housing? And where do we think the priorities are that we need to be focusing our efforts on? And then within that priority, within that focus, what is going to be the county's specific role in carrying out and implementing this strategic plan? And then also understanding, there are partners, there are strategic partners, there are people that are doing work in other facets that touch housing, and how can we bring them on and align them with those priorities? The worksheet that you have in front of you doesn't look like this exactly, but it has these headings. And as we think about what the strategy framework will look like, these are sort of the main categories that we see. There's obviously a production element. There's what sort of new housing is needed. What does that housing need to look like? Where should it go? How do we facilitate putting it where it makes the most benefit for the community? There's a preservation aspect. Obviously, there's a lot of housing stock already in the county. Some of it of varying conditions, right? And so, and varying affordability, and that dynamic is changing. So how can we preserve that affordability and maintain the housing stock we have to really, again, kind of move the needle on these housing issues and these housing challenges? Access and stability is really looking at how do you connect people to the housing, whether it's new or existing, allowing them to stay in their homes, to have stability in home ownership, in rentership. What does that look like? What are the services and tools and programs needed to promote that? And then really there's a capacity issue that we understand is a big challenge here in Charleston County, and understanding kind of what are the constraints of land. Some of that is real and physical and environmental and infrastructure, and some of it is policy and desire and community desire. What is that capacity, and where it kind of begins to answer the where do we put it? I would encourage you to have this worksheet out as we go through this presentation. If the analysis, if some piece of data resonates with you and causes you to think of something in one of these buckets, or within the categories of tools and policies, programs and resources, that you think about a question you want to ask us, something you want us to research and dive into, note it on that worksheet, and that'll help guide the conversation at the end of the presentation. So that's enough for preamble. We're going to dive into the data now. And one of the big pieces of this one of the starting points that we like to start with is understanding what is affordable housing. It was a conversation that came up in all of our stakeholder, all of our stakeholder conversations came up with you all in our first meeting. Rule of thumb, affordable housing is, if you're a household that's paying more than 30% of your income on housing, you are housing cost burdened. Whether you're a renter or a homeowner, you're paying, mortgage and utilities, or rent and utilities. If you're spending more than 30% of your income, it's considered housing cost burden, and that housing is not affordable. Like here in Charleston County, on the renter side, if we take the The median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment here in Charleston County, you're looking at $1,500 of monthly rent. That is a big rent. What kind of household income do you need to afford that rent and not be cost burdened? $62,000. And we'll talk about, you all probably are automatically having a sense of what are households, who's earning that? What do the households look like that are earning that or aren't earning that? And if they aren't earning that, what are they paying in rent, and are they cost burdened? And that's, where that 46% of renters are cost burdened in Charleston County because of the cost of housing. On the household, on the ownership side, you're looking at a median sales price in Charleston County of $538,000 for a house. The income needed to afford that and not be cost burdened is $150,000 annually, with some assumptions in there about how much you have for down payment and PMI costs and other factors that get into that. And then you can see on the ownership side, just 15% of households have this income. Never mind the savings needed to actually save for the down payment to get to that house, right? And so again, not a lot of access to the median values of rent and home value. Another way to think about this is thinking about how incomes relate to the median area income for Charleston County. And that's what AMI is, area median income. And if you could just drop, these rates that you see here, 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 80 to 120, 150 and up, those are all kind of just baseline established area median income values that HUD puts out there for some of its programs, and to understand, what's affordable at different income ranges. And you can see there kind of how we start to break that down. You can see that, and also for those of you not real familiar with AMI data and how this breaks down, HUD also looks at this by the size and type of household. And so what you've got here is the percentage of households. These are for one-person households, and the income for one person. So right there in the middle income or workforce housing area, an elementary school teacher making $60,000, if that's just a single person, is in that workforce housing. And think about where we were with median values for rent, median values for home values, not quite there. Paramedic, 49. You start to see kind of how the different jobs and the different incomes that come in to play put households along that spectrum differently. We also tried to do some, just some sort of scenarioing, kind of like thinking about, that software engineer working part-time, taking care, of their elderly mom, might make $55,000, and then they need sort of that workforce 80 to 120% AMI value for, for rent or home ownership. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you kind of see how we were trying to, just get at couples with no kids, a single mom with 2 kids, and when you start to take that income and then that family dynamic, it can move families and households up and down this line very significantly. And I think when you start to look at it this way, you start to tell a story and to start to connect people to this kind of nebulous idea of what is AMI, what is workforce, low income, high income housing, and what that means specifically here in Charleston County. So that's the affordability that kind of paints a picture of affordability. It's, it could be housing cost burden. It's within that spectrum of area median income. We're going to talk about a few of the dynamics that are coming into play here that are impacting this issue of affordability. What you see here, the blue line on top, this is home value growth according to Zillow in Charleston County. And you can see the jump from just after the recession in 2011 to 2021, just that 10-year jump, a 78% increase in the past decade of home value growth in Charleston County. Certainly higher than the increases being experienced statewide in South Carolina, keeping pace with the United States, but certainly higher than that U.S. average. And now we layer in kind of the income aspect of this and understanding how has ownership households, households that own their homes, what does their income look like over the last 20 years, but certainly over the last 10 years, while you've seen that 78% increase in home values, you have not seen that same increase in incomes. And so you're starting to see this disparity between income growth and home value growth. Same picture on the renter side. You know, since 2010, you've seen a 50% increase in rents, in average rents for Charleston County. And then the income picture is a little bit more complex here. The median renter income has been going, it is growing, but what I think we're also seeing here is that it is also growing because more higher income people are now renting more than they did in the past. So rather than saying that, well, our renter incomes, you know, for all renters is growing at a rate that seems to be getting closer to these median rents, the data is really presenting kind of who that pool of renters actually is, and you're starting to see, and the other data is supporting our, this assertion that you're actually seeing more high-income households entering the rental market. Whether that's due to a tightening of the ownership market and not being able to find homes to buy, so they have to rent if they're going to be here. I think that's part of the dynamic. So that's the affordability picture. We're going to talk again, kind of a little bit of a high level about some of the other factors that are driving this. Not the affordability, yes, but just driving some of this housing, the housing picture in totality here. One of it is just simply population growth. In the last 10 years, you can see from 2010 to 2020, how the population growth and the growth rate has increased. 16 people per day, moving into Charleston County over the last 10 years, and certainly beginning to outpace kind of the average growth of the United States. Not quite keeping pace with the MSA, with the region here in Charleston County, within the MSA, but certainly taking a large share of that. That population growth story is also a migration story, and the thing that I will highlight here is that you can see where are the counties, the cities that are bringing in, where are the people mostly coming from, and the largest markets they're leaving New York City, Charlotte, Baltimore, Hilton Head, Bridgeport. They're coming to Charleston. To the MSA. And so what this is really showing is not only is there a migration factor to just the population growth, but this is migration from very high cost areas. And so if they are already homeowners and they're selling homes and moving here and buying homes, their ability to buy higher end homes is much greater than migration from other areas. There's an employment factor. And the economy, growing at an even faster rate. You can see the dark blue line at the top. That's the Charleston, North Charleston MSA. That's the regional job growth, and you can see how quickly jobs have climbed since the recession in 2010, outpacing Charlotte, outpacing Jacksonville, outpacing Tampa. You can see there. So that economic growth is also driving a lot of the population growth and migration, and it's all working together to be a magnet and a draw for Charleston County and the region. And so now we start to kind of intersect some of that growth and the population change with the income. And you can see here that the net new households kind of by income group, a significant, very significant portion of that household income growth are those households making more than $50,000, actually more than $100,000 per household. And you can sort of see that breakdown, while at the same time, wage growth did not, match the pace of the housing cost growth. We kind of talked about that. So you've got a lot of people moving in, a lot of wealth moving in. Actually a reduction in lower income households probably getting pushed out to, outside of the county, and part of that probably getting pushed out to, outside of the county, and part of that dynamic. going to spend a few minutes on this slide here. This starts to summarize a little bit of the affordability, housing supply, and so what you're seeing here is the dark blue bars are the availability. They're the housing stock that is here, and household affordability. The light blue bars on the left side of the pair represent the number of people the number of households that are in those that could, based on their household income, could pay that average gross rent that you can see along the bottom there. And what you see is sort of, think of it as sort of a supply and demand. And so I'm going to start at the right-hand side, at the higher end side. You can see that there are a lot more households able to pay those higher average gross rents than there is units available for them to move into. And so if they're renters and they are staying renting because they aren't finding houses to buy and they're staying in this area, what does that mean? It means that they need to compete for the housing stock that is in those middle tiers. And then what happens is the people that are in the middle tiers are competing with folks with higher income for those particular units. And then that's part of what is driving the overall market, driving the overall increase in rents as that happens. On the other end of the spectrum, you see at those able to pay $400 or less in kind of an average gross rent, there's a lot of households that need to pay that amount in order to not be cost burdened. So these are also factoring that not paying more than 30% of your income. And you can see that the supply there's an undersupply on that end of the spectrum. And so what does that mean? The same thing. If those people are renting and they're renting in the area, they're either finding very low rent, very low gross rent places. There's a question on what the condition is of those. And then they also, as they move up, need to be competing with folks that have more money than them. And this is where that cost burden factor comes in. They have to rent where the supply is, which is in that middle bracket. And so you can see that the undersupply on both ends of the spectrum here, you can begin to understand how that is forcing everybody into the middle where the supply is and what that can do to driving up the rent prices. So this is an interesting dynamic that begins to kind of bring into the supply and the demand issues that we will continue to dissect for you all. On the for sale side, just a real quick, you can see over the last 10 years, the supply of units that are on, the months on the market, right? The months of supply that are out there has continued to decline over the last 10 years. And while that has continued to decline, part of that availability, that limited availability of for sale stock combined with the people moving in that have the means to buy more and compete more for that limited stock means that median sales prices are continuing to drive up. You want to take over? Yeah. So that is really kind of the issues of affordability and kind of the big picture macro issues of what's driving the issue. And now Miriam's going to walk through a series of slides talking about the issues and opportunities.
Yeah, great. So, there we're trying to just kind of set some baseline language, right? Like, what do we mean by affordable housing? What do we mean by the broader concept of affordability? Really thinking about that whole spectrum and the dynamics within that spectrum and this market. So now we want to, like Justin said, kind of talk about some of our sort of high-level observations about key issues and opportunities kind of that we see. So the first is that, new housing is being created. A lot of new housing is being built and created in Charleston County. But on the whole, what is being built is very, very expensive. So this chart shows, since 2000, all of the units that have been permitted and then built in the county. So you can see in that period, 2000 to 2010 or so, a lot of new development, and then following the recession, also a lot of new development. But that overall pace, even though it's been rapid, has actually declined a little bit in this last decade where population growth has actually accelerated. So a lot being built, but is it enough is kind of difficult to say. And what is being built, no longer, on the rental side, no longer does it kind of meet that affordability level of the median renter. So you can see before the recession, the rents of new construction apartments actually, were around or a little bit below the rent that would be affordable to the median renting household. So that's great. You're building for kind of the middle of the market. But after the recession, that is no longer the case. So rents of new construction apartments have been much higher, and especially in the last couple of years during COVID, with all of the supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, and kind of inflation more generally driving up construction prices, that is translating into much higher rents of that new construction product. And also, there is that demand of higher income renters there to rent it. However, kind of what is being added to the market on the whole doesn't meet the needs of all renters. Similar on the for sale side. So we looked at the sales prices of all homes that have been built that have been purchased in the last 2 years and built within the last 10 years. So, what is that housing that's under 10 years old? What is it selling at? It's selling at very expensive prices. So you can see, but for maybe 8% of all of that new construction for sale housing stock, everything else would be out of reach to that household at 120% of area median income. So, a lot is being built, but what is being built in this last decade is on the whole more expensive, and so we're adding a lot of new supply at the top of the market when there's demand growing throughout the market. So that was all, new construction, new supply, what's happening with the existing supply. That's really most of where everybody lives. And what we see here, no surprise to the people in this room that a lot of this existing housing that used to be affordable has grown much more expensive. And we wanted to quantify kind of exactly what was happening. So here we looked at the multifamily rental stock, and we broke it into different categories. So on the left, you see what's been happening rent-wise with Class C properties, units in Class C properties, and those are, can typically think of those as, those are your older properties, maybe they're not in, the most desirable locations, maybe they have a couple of deferred maintenance issues, but these are the properties that in a lot of communities we look at to, hope they're probably providing some of our affordable housing, right? And especially to families, they tend to be larger units than Class B and A units, which are, a little bit newer, a little bit, more desirably located. And so we broke it into these 3 categories to see, okay, is that rent appreciation really just at that in those very new properties? What's happening with older properties? And what we see is there has been a lot of rent growth in those older Class C properties as well. And what that looks like from the point of view of a household would be that, a unit, you rent like a 3-bedroom unit you're renting for your family in 2010, to rent that same unit today, you need to come up with $6,000 more a year to handle that rent increase. And wages have grown, but they haven't grown that much. And so that existing housing is becoming less and less affordable. We did a similar exercise on the for sale side, right? So, maybe those overall medians, we wonder, maybe that's picking up just that very high end of the for sale market. What's happening with the older housing, the smaller, older, sort of bottom tier of the market that might be your first-time home buyer type of home. And we see a lot of appreciation, a lot of growth in prices in that market as well. So again, it really has been significant increases across the board. And so, again, to buy a given home in that bottom tier category in 2010, to buy that same home today, you would have to be, coming up with, that larger mortgage, that additional down payment to support $140,000 more in a sales price. So that just cuts a lot of people out of that first-time home buyer market and starts to speak to that sort of pent-up demand of for sale supply that's keeping people in the rental market that is so hot. And we know, of course, this is a regional challenge, right? So maybe Berkeley and Dorchester counties, there's been a lot of growth there. Are they providing that more affordable option for people? And so what we did to kind of investigate that question was looked at where homes were being built and what the median sales price was in 2011 in Dorchester, Berkeley, and Charleston counties, and then what it is today in each of those places. And looking at it this way, you can see that, maybe these homes are more affordable outside of Charleston County, but that's a very quickly changing story. That this truly is a regional challenge, and sales prices are climbing very rapidly in those other communities as well. This third point is really a bright spot that we see in terms of projected job growth, that the region is projected to add a significant number of jobs with opportunity for economic mobility. And so thinking about those households and their housing needs when we're thinking ahead about policy and strategy to support mixed income communities, right? So here, this is looking at the sectors with the highest projected growth in the next 10 years. And construction, manufacturing, and transportation and warehousing sectors, that you might shorthand as blue-collar jobs, these are jobs that are fairly high-paying. These are good salaries and don't always have a high barrier to entry of a bachelor's degree or something like that. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of projected growth in these categories for the region. And so, that's a real bright spot in terms of the region's economic future. And how can the community create opportunities for these households to, maybe it's save, maybe it's have that first-time homeownership opportunity in mixed income communities within the county, rather than looking only to relatively more affordable options on the the fringes of the growing region. Mm-hmm. A fourth issue that we see is that the county's stock of those dedicated affordable units, so these are units that have some type of legal restriction on rent or maybe income qualification. This is a very limited and precious stock of housing, and many will need preservation attention in the years ahead. So we looked at these dedicated housing supports of all different kinds. So in the blue, you see low-income housing tax credit units. In the gray, housing choice vouchers. Purple, public housing, and then orange, other HUD-assisted multifamily housing of different kinds. And we looked at that entire stock to see, of everything that's available, how many units or supports, so units and vouchers, are we talking about, and how many people could use that, could qualify on the basis of their income. And you can see there are about 11,000 of those supports available, but we estimate as many as 50,000 households who could qualify. So for every 5 households that could qualify for one of these supports, there's just one that actually receives it. So this is a very precious resource. And thinking ahead about adding to that supply and preserving that existing supply, we looked at kind of the pace of production. So the low-income housing tax credit, many of you know it's the main production program for dedicated affordable housing. And in the last 10 years, on average, the county has been adding about 50 units a year to this dedicated supply through the LIHTC program. And that's about one property, really. So over the next 10 years, say that average pace of production continues, that's 500 new units, but in that same amount of time, there will be 400 new qualifying households a year. And so there is a gap today between what's available and how many people could use that support, and that gap could grow. So what are the opportunities to accelerate that pace of production through these programs or in some other way so that more households receive those types of supports? Another note that we haven't detailed here, but that we did look into is how many of these units might be losing their affordability restrictions. Each of these programs has its own kind of clock, or they can. And there are significant preservation needs for the low-income housing tax credit stock, as well as multifamily assisted properties, the blue and the orange here. So, we also wanted to get our arms around, okay, what land is available for development? There's a ton of growth, a ton of housing that will be needed. So what land is available, and strategically leveraging this limited land availability really will be crucial. So what we did here, and I know this map is might be hard to read at a distance, but what we wanted to see was, okay, if we kind of look at everything that's already built out in the county, everything that is protected, as conservation land or otherwise, everything that has been designated as kind of development sensitive or really best for community preservation as agricultural land, even if not protected, and then those highest risk flood areas. So you can see those existing buildings in blue, protected lands in different shades of green, and then the highest risk flood zone in that blue. Kind of that negative space of what's left really is pretty limited. And we're trying to kind of pull that out here in this pink to get a picture of, in addition to redevelopment, which we know is happening, redevelopment and infill happening very much, and that's going to be part of the story, where will development pressure, maybe especially for that single family housing, where might that be pushing? And you can see, just based on this look, development pressure may continue pushing west, right, into these areas where infrastructure costs are high, they're outside of the urban growth boundary, and it will be, for those reasons and others, difficult to provide a more affordable option in that new development pattern. And it also raises questions for the impact on existing communities in these areas. And then, most land that is within the urban growth boundary is in North Charleston, which just, emphasizes the importance of really thinking about what development could look like there. A sixth issue or opportunity we wanted to spot here is about the kind of the incredible opportunity to create and preserve housing along the Low Country Rapid Transit Corridor, and that this will be increasingly pressing as the project moves forward. There will be only more and more potential speculation for that land and for its use. And so we looked at this corridor, publicly owned vacant land and privately owned vacant land along the corridor, recognizing again, a lot of this opportunity, a lot of that corridor will be in North Charleston, as well as on the peninsula and up into Somerville. And the Council of Governments has done a lot of great work to study housing in this corridor. And so, we looked in detail at that report and have kind of pulled out some of these key points as it relates to development opportunities here. So right now, in that light blue, there are actually as many as 4,000 units of dedicated affordable housing that exist today. Some of those are those units that are on that, sort of ticking clock, if you will, in terms of the need to preserve low-income housing tax credit units or other dedicated units. Then there's also a lot of land, of course, that has the potential to be redeveloped, reutilized at kind of a higher, denser, kind of transit-oriented type of density. So as many as 2,400 acres of what the Council of Governments has identified as acreage of potential change. So some of that's vacant, but some of it is kind of underutilized parking lots and industrial and otherwise. And there are 23 households currently living within these half-mile transit-oriented development areas, and the Council of Governments identifies as much potential growth as 20,000 additional households. So again, not thinking about specific strategies today, but definitely kind of highlighting this as a really pressing opportunity in terms of creating mixed income communities and a housing that meets that broader spectrum of affordability. We wanted to highlight what we know is also, an important concern in the community, that the prosperity of all of this incredible property appreciation and home value growth has not been shared equitably across the community. And we wanted to look at, and there are many dimensions to this, but one important one and kind of basic one is that home ownership rate. So what really has been the opportunity for people with different racial or ethnic backgrounds to even have that home to take care of and build that intergenerational wealth. And what you can see is there are significant gaps. And actually with Black and African American households, you see that home ownership rate modestly declining over these past 2 decades. So, an issue of concern that we wanted to highlight as part of this conversation. Water. I should have been prepared. Excuse me. Excuse me. And so, we know that that is a lot of data here, but there's one more thing we wanted to put in front of you, which is kind of estimating, okay, if that's the picture today, what are we talking about in terms of the future demand for housing? What is the number of units across that spectrum of affordability? Excuse me. this type of projection, I'll say, is both art and science. We look at it a lot of different ways. These are 4 of the main questions we ask, which is, what can current residents afford, right? They're a very important part of this community that is growing. How much will the population grow? What jobs is the economy projected to add? And what specific groups within the current population, and even with migration from other parts of the country, which of these specific groups are growing most quickly? And we look at all of those things together to get to just that top line number. This is kind of a preliminary estimate of what we think is the number of units that would need to be accommodated in the county to meet growing future housing demand. Now, of course, that overall unit number only tells a very small part of the story, because we know that this needs to be lots of different types of units. And this is a chart that shows our estimate of the different price points, kind of this distribution of both future and current for sale and rental demand. So in orange, you see estimated rental demand at those different AMI segments. So for example, we're estimating that the county will need as many as 2,200 rental units affordable to people with incomes below 30% of the area median income. So the orange is rental demand and the blue for sale demand. And just to emphasize that this shows kind of the importance of providing housing across the entire affordability spectrum, especially in a community growing so rapidly. One way to think about this is that some price points of units the market can help create if it is allowed. So above that, basically 120% of AMI category, roughly, you might think of it in terms of reducing the barriers for market to add the supply. But really, at about 120% of area median income and below, these are units that the market just has a very hard time delivering without some sort of support. And that support could be an incentive, it could be policy, it could be any number of things. And so those incentives will be, we know an important part of the strategy conversation, thinking ahead, starting at about 120% AMI and below. When you're at about 60% of AMI and below, that's where development subsidy in many cases is really needed to make a project feasible. And under 30% of area median income, operating subsidies, so really ongoing support to cover operating expenses for those units to ensure that they're both quality and affordable is crucial for those to be feasible projects. And so this, in many cases, as we're thinking ahead, will set a foundation for the strategy conversation, right? So, which strategies could make a difference for different parts of the spectrum, because not every option will meet every type of housing need. And so, this is where we're going next. And I'm introducing these questions, which will shape the discussion at our next workshop with you all. So based on all of this information, which, like Justin mentioned, we're going to get to you in a format where you can really sit with it and digest it. What is the full slate of options that should be considered? Which of these are really going to make an impact? And then, from there, what is the county's role? What are the roles of other partners? And what are the immediate priorities for action? And really quickly here, of course, we have very thoroughly reviewed all of the work that's been done to date. We know there have been a lot of ideas put on the table. And so, here are many of those ideas organized into this framework that Justin showed before, thinking about production, about preservation, access and stability, and capacity. And then along the bottom, just very broadly, options for resources to support different types of strategies. So this will be really the meat of the discussion in the next phase, in the strategy phase. But today, I think really just wanted to share our observations and projections and analysis, and just have time for a really good discussion with you all to kind of begin to digest this all together before jumping into thinking about these options.
That's good. Leave that there. So that's all. Yeah, right? Yeah, so, really, I think we'll get into just the discussion right now. I want to leave this up there to just sort of kind of, this plus the worksheet and kind of just to remind ourselves that we're moving in a strategic, direction. And some of that is, understanding, where might be some existing resources that we could reallocate, reprogram, use in different ways, layering with new tools that maybe the county isn't using yet, or maybe that they're using in certain ways, but leveraged with other funds might be directed, towards other locations. One of the things I was sort of noodling on, and as I was listening to Miriam and thinking about this conversation, there's the affordability conversation. There's who are we serving at what AMI, and how do we do that? There's also the existing housing stock that exists across the county, and how do we continue to preserve that and maintain that? And there are a lot of unique Charleston cultural dynamics that come into play with some of those conversations. There's the from the production standpoint, where does it go? I really liked the map and the analysis that shows, we've got different sensitive areas, protected areas, developed areas. So where are the underutilized or available areas for development? And then, what do those mean? And some of those exist outside of the growth boundary, and they don't have utilities. And so what does that mean for, investment in infrastructure? I think the rapid transit line is a great opportunity that we've been exploring, and that's part of that geography of understanding where do these solutions go. So as we're thinking about this strategy, it is complex. It's the people, it's the stock, it's the where, it's the how, right? And I think that's what we're trying to demonstrate with this framework, and that just to kind of illustrate a way of thinking about where we're headed when it comes to prioritizing and putting out there, particularly if there's a dedicated housing fund, what are the priorities to use that for? Because it can't be for everything, and it can't be everywhere, or it won't solve the problem because the peanut butter's too thin, right? So that's how I wanted to just summarize this. Mr. Chairman, however you want to facilitate discussion, I think we're just open to questions and comments from what they've seen, conclusions or thoughts about where we want to go. It's wide open for you in the committee.
Sure. Thank you for all that. I really enjoyed how it was broken down, and especially at the different price points. I think that's a big piece of the conversation that we sometimes gloss over. So thank you for including that. We'll try to do this as orderly as possible. I think I saw Ms. Boley first, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I have a question about what sort of strategies would be included in reducing barriers for the market to add supply for that 120% AMI higher. I'm just not familiar with that, and just wondered what sorts of things would be included in that.
Yeah, so my team's going to jump in when I totally don't answer the question here. But so when I'm thinking about barriers on the higher end market side, some of the conversations that we have is, in a lot of housing strategies is that higher end, unit might look very different than what's being built right now. There might be a demand for something that is higher density has a mixed use character, and some zoning codes, some communities don't want higher densities or don't understand, like they just think about density, but they don't think about what it can mean and what the opportunities are there. And so their zoning codes, for example, don't allow for that. That's one area, it's a big area where we often see, on that market-driven side of things, and we don't always hear that from developers. Sometimes we don't hear it from developers because the developers are able to develop what they are, and they're used to developing what they are, and hey, they're just happy doing that, even if they're not meeting a certain segment of demand and not delivering a certain housing type. And again, I'm thinking sort of high amenity multifamily. And so that's when we start to have these conversations. And when we mention density, the developers sometimes will perk up because, hey, if there's greater density, and then I could be all for that. And then it's a conversation, it's a community conversation, it's a regulatory conversation. So that's, I think, the biggest one that comes to my mind of kind of streamlining or helping that market-driven side of things. I don't know if there's anything.
Or just the tax increment financing piece too.
Yeah, say a little bit. Yeah, you want to?
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, no,
I'll come to the mic.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, also on there is the tax increment financing, which can help, especially with that higher density or mixed use development type. That's another opportunity potentially. We'd have to look at what the feasibility is in terms of what the state allows, and so that's another area we could look at, and also just land assembly strategies as well, assisting with that, and brownfield remediation is another one. So it's really unlocking currently undevelopable land because of environmental issues to basically open it up for the marketplace. It's another strategy.
Mr. Riley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two hopefully quick questions. Number one, just curious, how does the data stack up just based on your analyses of other communities around the country? Is it, how does it, as we look at sort of, we're here on behalf of the government to help think through this, what kind of challenge does this look like as compared to some of the other research that you've done? First question. The second question, maybe more a local question, is just as we look at asset mapping, like what do we have now with the different housing authorities and, Section 8 capability, nonprofit capability? Is there data available that shows like this many units exist under these different categories so we can kind of look at where we are right now and how we would build capacity on top of that? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
So the first one is you are as unique as just about everywhere else that we've been working. I will say this, I think some of the challenges that we are seeing and that we're talking about when it comes to land availability is certainly probably pretty prominent here. I guess another way to say it is, we've been doing this all over the Midwest and the Southeast. We've been in markets that are being heavily impacted by student housing and student housing demand and development and what that does to the market dynamic. We're in, Manhattan, Kansas, and so they've got not only K-State, but they've also got, Fort Riley, right? So they've got, a military presence and a university presence, as well as some land constraints that are significantly impacting, their ability. Our work in Omaha, much bigger region, they get a whole lot more LIHTC, for example, and a whole lot more dedicated housing opportunities there. And, but we were talking about a much bigger region and kind of a little bit more dynamic, I think, just by sheer size. So I think there's some uniqueness here. I think one of the big things, the growth, the employment growth, the population growth, the amount of income that's coming into the county, combined with the land constraints, I think are a couple of the factors I think jumping out at us as unique here that we aren't seeing quite the same in other markets.
But then there's the national challenges too.
Yeah.
Cost of development. And
Oh, yeah, I mean, that, yeah, right. And Brian's just saying, that there's also this national, right? What's the national story around housing and the cost of development, the cost of supplies, the limited labor, all of that, dynamic is happening everywhere. And so, perhaps exacerbated here by some other factors, but, it's still experiencing that.
Yeah, just a couple of other things that come to mind. We actually did, but then didn't include because, you just have to choose where to stop, is a comparison of Charleston County to other counties in the southeast that, you think would be growing really quickly, in many cases do have limited land availability. And two things from that stood out, I think. The first is that in that last 10 years of home value appreciation, Charleston County had the highest of any of the peer communities that we looked at. And so, to most people in the community, that's not necessarily good news. There are some winners in that, but that did stand out. And then I think another thing that when we were looking at the dedicated housing supply and the history of LIHTC allocations, kind of with that preservation kind of idea or potential focus in mind, we wanted to look at kind of the ownership of properties that might be reaching the end of that initial 15-year compliance period in the coming decade, and looking at that history of allocations to for-profit or nonprofit housing developers. We noticed it in comparison to other communities where we have experience. It's a much more for-profit oriented low-income housing tax credit development community here. Not necessarily a threat or a weakness, but I think when people talk about preservation of affordable housing, that like dedicated affordable housing nationally, I think people kind of understand nonprofit-owned low-income housing tax credit projects to be relatively more stable or secure, and the likelihood that they'll be maintained as affordable after their affordability restrictions end. So I think the importance of building that affordable housing development and nonprofit housing development capacity was something that stood out.
Yeah, I would actually say maybe from a SWOT sort of perspective, it is a weakness. It's a weakness in the system that's here that allows us to think about what is if the threat is, low-income housing tax credit properties, falling off of, their compliance period, is the fact that they are, largely owned by private developers, a weakness in the system that makes it difficult to meet that challenge, meet that threat. Maybe.
I think Ms. Woodward, did I see your name or hand first?
Yes. We have seen over the last 10 years this tremendous housing increase, costs, and affordability. But it's been more than 10 years. I've been doing this in this community for almost 40. Was there any consideration when you're coming up with your plan and looking at the possibility of bringing together local governments together and say, listen, there is a problem with housing. Land doesn't grow. What about let's create a land bank that can spread out through the many years? This growth is not going to stop. And as we continue to look for land to build on, it's going to, unless we have given a huge amount of subsidy, we will not be able to create affordable housing. Well, I know we're not supposed to use that terminology, I think, but that's how I look at it. Affordable and attainable for all the people that are moving into our community. And if we keep selling this land, we won't have any. So are we looking really at the future as we look at creating a plan that 10 years from now, will we have the land to build on?
I think that's a good question for you as a steering committee, because the short answer is yes. I mean, it is a tool in the toolbox. And I think that's something, that we will be exploring as far as, understanding what that tool might be able to accomplish within the strategy. I'd say, yes, it is. I'd say, how it layers within this framework right here is an important conversation that we will continue to have with you all and with Daryl and the county and moving forward. And I talk with my hands and, so, I mean, the short answer is yes. It's a tool in the toolbox, and it's something that needs to be considered, and understanding how that tool gets used and where it gets used. I think there's another maybe implication to your question about kind of the regionalism and getting everybody kind of at the table. We're having those conversations. We've met with 6 or 7 of the mayors at this point, and we'll continue to do that and cultivate these conversations and cultivate relationships with their staff. And so, I mean, I think there's a very much a desire from the county's perspective to have a county regional, as well as a larger, COG regional perspective to this. The nature of kind of the county municipality relationship, it's what is the county, what sort of tools and structures are the county able to put into place that says, hey, take advantage of this, because I don't think there's probably not as much stick as there is carrot. And so how does that work? I will say, and also you all know, given the diversity of the municipalities within the county and just the different regions, not all of the municipalities have the same political will to take advantage of all the tools you put out there. And I think that's a reality of that we will have to build into the strategy to say it isn't just, hey, here's a great tool. It's understanding where that tool might have the most bang for the buck and help the county kind of target that so that those resources are used where they're going to be willingly accepted. And I think that's,
Chairman.
yeah.
I just want to add a little piece of that. We've actually been around the county talking to different municipalities as a staff, and one of the interesting things that we find is that in many cases, the employed staff of the municipality will understand the problem and will want to help bring those resources, but the population of that jurisdiction and sometimes the elected officials have determined we want to be an exclusive community. And that is going to be a huge challenge going forward.
Well, I believe it was Ms. Jackson, then Mr. Logan, and we'll come back over here.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I don't want to, have a disjointed discussion as we're sort of building momentum, but this is just these 4, categories on this one worksheet. That it's such a huge elephant, and I do feel like the missing piece of that elephant for a long time, ever since I've been watching the county's growth and development for 20-some years, and seeing all of the trends that, other jurisdictions or other metro areas have been experienced, and Charleston really didn't ever see itself in the same place of having the growth and the capacity challenges that now are staring us, in the face. So I think that's the good news in terms of knowing that we've got a problem that the county is now taking responsibility to be a huge part of the solutions. And so I think that, maybe a good way of getting started, I mean, we could just sit here, for days and talk about the different tools and things like that. But as you were bringing up the, the realities of losing the LIHTC properties, that maybe in each one of these categories, we should figure out where the best opportunity for the county to be a game changer or a rescuer, or however we would want to talk about it, that would be most politically and popular among people that say, yeah, we don't want to lose what we have. So maybe production is not the way to talk about it so early on, because people don't want to see a lot of density. They don't want to see a lot of growth. I don't think as I stated the last meeting in just trying to help support the bond referendum. There had to be a majority vote by the county voters of Charleston. It was clear that people don't really understand the true problems and solutions. They just know the buzzwords. We don't want density. We don't want growth. We don't want traffic. So I think when we use words like production and capacity, those are probably not as popular at the high level of, reading about it as something like preservation. Preservation is in the culture of our whole region, and we're preserving the housing that we already have. We're taking apart the neighborhoods that we know are at most risk of loss, like Henrietta's community, and maybe, having the county do a very mind-catching model project or rescue opportunity that wouldn't have been successful without the county's participation. I feel like, people only learn by seeing something happen, and to talk about strategies and, the whole laundry list of, every one of these tools is highly used and, experienced in a lot of locations around the country. So it's not like we don't have the credibility of the work you've already done, but somehow we've got to get started, and somehow we have to sell it that this is going to be a good thing that only the county can do and nobody else, or with the other jurisdictions. But without the county's presence, whatever we're trying to promote will not happen.
Mr. Logan?
I just want to say thank you. This was excellent. And I really think this is in a format that the overall public can understand. I think a big portion of this is education and educating the public on why this is important and why this matters to them. So just wanted to say thank you on that. But I kind of wanted to echo too as well the comments that just were made and asked. Kind of as you were doing your studies, was there a specific area that you identified as this would be the hands down best area to go in and say, hey, let's go in and start with this community, kind of as she mentioned, it's based on land availability. So that was one question. And then I did have a question as well when we talked about the 29,000 to 36,000 units that are needed. That need is as of when? So how far does that span out?
10 years.
10 years, okay. And then looking forward, do we know kind of projection-wise what that would be kind of looking forward? We thought about that?
What, in what way?
As far as, so in 10 years from now, kind of what would that need be as far as number of units?
Oh, beyond 10 years?
Beyond 10 years, yeah. If we looked
Well,
at the kind of projected growth of where we are with 16 people moving here per day.
Population projections go out 30 years, 40,
Yeah.
whatever the MPO
MPO does, yeah.
does. So we can
Yeah, it's
go
35
out
years,
further,
yeah.
but,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, the population projections from the Council of Governments, typically go, I think, 30 to 40 years, 30, 35 years. And so, I mean, we could use those population projections to continue to derive at some demand. I think all it does is make the numbers go bigger. And I think at this point, we're just trying to say, within a realistic 10-year time frame, what could that look like given the population and employment growth? If this is what the region can expect, what does that mean from a unit standpoint? I don't know. I'm curious. When you say beyond that 10 years, what are you wanting it to? What would you want that data to tell you, other than just sort of, if you just drew a straight line, it would just be that much more kind of perspective. What?
Well, no, I mean that's good.
Oh, that's it.
That's
Okay.
just just wanted to know had we thought about that, or what was any numbers around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what would be interesting is, I know this is sort of it's a mental exercise, but to say, okay, if in 10 years we have this fantastic regional housing strategy, maybe even now we're talking tri-county housing strategy, and and it's able to accommodate the growth, and then after 10 years, sort of do another set of projections. Part of those projections is that land availability and kind of other things that are going on. And, you probably don't see that straight line going from what's now the first 10 years to the next 10 and 20 years. It probably isn't a straight line growth if you're being realistic about the capacity of Charleston County and even the 3-county area to absorb that growth. Not without the density, and what have you. So I'd say from our standpoint, it's I don't know if safer is the right word, but it's more realistic to just say over this next 10 years, understand what the land availability is, understand what the opportunities like the LRT and other things, CLRT are, what's the realistic opportunity for infrastructure expansion into those areas that might be undeveloped, and the desire for those areas to actually develop, because I'm not sure if they even necessarily want to, right? You start layering that in, and we can craft a strategy around that for the next 10 years. You start getting beyond that, and I would just imagine don't have the capacity for the same amount of growth. That's just me sort of getting out on a limb. I probably shouldn't, but that's what I would imagine.
Mr. Cheney?
Thank you all for your excellent presentation. I think it was really comprehensive. Could talk about several things, but I think just broadly speaking, the LIHTC program, as you mentioned, is the largest producer of affordable housing in the United States. And I think it's important for this body to know and to understand that program kind of in and out, and then specifically regionally how Charleston compared to our sister cities in Columbia and Greenville are benefiting more from that program than we are, and why is that? And then also for this whole body to really understand how that program works and what happens, this is a tough job, Justin, but in a very high level elevator speech, give us the history of the LIHTC program, how it works, how it incentivizes. Well, just so everybody knows, I think it's important to know after 15 years what happens to these properties, and even locally, nonprofit LIHTC developers have, in the last few years, have had to sell off, even as a nonprofit here locally in West Ashley, and just what that does for those 80 to 100 families in that development. So because I do think as just low-hanging fruit, because the LIHTC program is the biggest producer of affordable housing, and how in our market, those projects do have the density that we need to see to fix the housing problem. And so I think it's important. If there's any tweak in the presentation, I would think it would be to add a little bit more about that, just because that, again, that is the largest producer of affordable housing in the country, and our market specifically has really missed out in the last 10 years on those incentives.
All right. So rather than addressing that now, I will commit to we'll expand on that.
Sure.
We'll expand on that a little bit, and that deliverable we'll give you in a couple of weeks.
But generally, just so I guess maybe this body knows, in 15, those projects are incentivized not through direct funds, but through tax incentives. And then in 15 years, generally those projects roll off and become market rate units. And the theory is if you produce enough of those a year, you can have a continuous supply of those units. And after 15 years, you can recapitalize the project and keep them affordable. And I think that's what you're talking about.
That is.
Right now, those projects in our market, there's no ability to recapitalize them and keep them affordable. And so I think what you guys are talking about is finding a way to keep those affordable past that initial 15 years. And I agree that would be a great opportunity and something that we could explore, but as well as increasing production. We do have the capacity to have 2 or more of those projects funded, every year by the state. And, up until the state credit in 2020, we didn't have any of those projects, and so for several years. And so, again, I think this presentation is really great, and I would just encourage this body to really think like a developer is how I like to say it. Is development is really hard, as some of the folks on this board are developers, and the affordable housing product as a development type is the hardest thing to develop in our market. And it also produces some of the less financial incentives for developers. So we see self-storage units built, these big, and if you think like a developer, well, those are the easiest things to build because you don't have to have parking and plumbing and all those things, and they can produce the highest ROI, right? So as this body, as we want to create market-based solutions we need to think like a developer. Okay, how can we incentivize private developers or nonprofit developers to expand their capacity? And I think this is a great start at looking at those tools and those opportunities. So,
Yeah, well, I think that, absolutely, we can provide really detailed information on that, so everybody has kind of the full information there. And then the only other thought I would add is that, the rules of that program, of course, are governed by, the federal government. And for the last several years, there's been on and off conversation about significantly expanding that program. And we'll check to see exactly where those conversations are. But I think, there is, it's one of those things where there's a lot of bipartisan support to do it. And so if in the case that South Carolina has more credits to distribute in the coming 5 years even, for the Charleston community to be poised to be more competitive for that larger pot would be just a very important opportunity.
Chairman, real quick follow-up. This awesome book that I found out about through Josh Dix's realtor presentation probably a few months back talks about the LIHTC program and how it's really funded about, and I'll read it here. It's The Affordable City by Shane Phillips. It's really a really approachable toolkit if you can kind of thumb through it and say, okay, how do housing vouchers work and what can we do to improve those? Anyways, it talks about, Miriam, how that the LIHTC program is only about 1/5 of the size of what we need in the U.S. And ironically, we have only about 1 out of 5 affordable families have housing, as what your presentation showed. And so, there shows what great opportunity there is to expand that program. I know it's a federally funded program, but the state housing authority does have great jurisdiction on how those credits are awarded. And so I just want to throw that out. Thank you.
And that's basically why Charleston doesn't get their share.
Amen.
Let's try to have everyone ask a question first, and then we'll circle back. Is that okay? Okay. We're going to go Mr. Roden and then Mr. Dukes.
Sure, and this might be for Mr. Davis. In the western part of the county you're talking about, outside of the urban growth boundary, we've been given through the county some additional density, and we've tried to build to that, but the soils don't support it. We have to do septic tanks. There's no sewer. So I guess my question is, moving out of the urban growth boundary, how open is the council to moving that boundary? Is that something that's even reasonable as far as this committee? I saw the eyes go up. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But that is something that's hindering our development in that part of the county. We've got affordable, or as affordable builders, we get increased density all day long, but until the septic soils will support that, we can't even build to what we're allowed to do. So
The only thing I'll say is it's been discussed as a staff. I would not venture to say what council thinks about it. I would expect that we would at least ask them about it, but that's as far as I'll go right now.
Mr. Dukes?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. One is how Ms. Jackson was talking about how we talk about affordable housing at large, and I've come to the acceptance that it carries a stigma with certain people because they kind of crawl behind density and traffic, but ultimately it's at its base. I think they don't want undesirable people living near them, and how do we change how we talk about it as a county at large and try to take away, destigmatize it, and says that, not having a stock of affordable housing impacts us all in one way or the other, from the local firefighter to the teacher who can't live here. How do we take real world examples about the impact of affordable housing? Because I've heard numbers about schools like Wanda, for instance, they have high teacher turnover because the teachers can't afford to live where they work. When you're commuting 40 minutes to an hour one way, that's a housing issue more so than anything else, and how that brings real world consequences to the people who live in these air quotes exclusive communities.
Yeah, I'll jump on. Do you have another one? And I'll jump on that one first. So
But
yeah,
I
I think you just did it. I
yeah.
think you just did it. That's one of the conversations we've been having as a team is how do you personalize the experience exactly the way you just described it, so that there's an understanding that housing touches everybody, and there's an economic impact. If you have hospitality workers that can't, that can't live in your community and have to commute, the further out that they have to go, and that it's exacerbating the transportation, issues and the traffic issues that you're already feeling, and then your housing policies are, compounding on that. If you push them out far enough, the idea that, job growth where they're now living, because it's maybe a little bit more affordable, now that becomes the job that they're going to take, and there could be a real constriction of, the ability to continue, or do you have to pay your employees more because they have to travel more, or, all of that. So, it really is trying to, and I think that's one of the things I wrote here. Actually, the very first thing I wrote at the top of my page, let's start talking stories, right? And let's start as we communicate in this education, that's coming online. We will be having a lot more communications and videos, and how do you get the message out there? And that message is those scenarios, let's call them, or those stories of, what do two hospitality workers without kids, where are they living, and how are they able to afford or not afford? What is that single earner with a stay-at-home spouse and one kid? What's going on there? What are those two middle income, people with two kids? What does their scenario look like? And, where does that fit them because of their different household dynamics in that affordability spectrum? And then let's tell a story about what, your neighbor, your kid's teacher, your employee if you're a restaurant owner, and start telling those stories in a way that makes those connections. I think that's a big part of the next phase for us as we're doing strategy and getting into what that looks like. Being able to tell those stories helps educate the public and gets the buy-in of, why are all these, politicos and electeds and policy wonks talking all this stuff? Well, here's why, and we're going to paint some real stories around that. So you answered it. I mean, that's what we're doing. That's next. Yeah,
and my second was more sort of like a note. I've met with multiple heirs property owners out in like some of these areas where the community just more or less grew around them. And they're land rich but cash poor, so they don't have the infrastructure to bring out sewer and water to these communities. But they've gone to the local municipality and asked for help, and municipalities kind of like shunned them away. And they feel it's more like, well, they're just waiting for someone to die so that they can make a tax run on the property, which is probably some truth to that. But how do we become more of a facilitator? And I know Mr. Davis, y'all talked about it internally. More of a facilitator for these opportunities where people have property, they just need the ability to make it more affordable for them to develop it.
So we've actually not just the heirs property and settlement communities, but we've talked to a number of different landowners who have land, who say, we see the growth, we want to capitalize on it, and they can't even get a developer interested because the infrastructure is not there and it's not enough units to be profitable for the developer. I can go over here and build 100 versus building 25 on your land. Right. So we are looking at ways that we could facilitate that. The biggest hurdle to any of that all goes back to the same thing, which is infrastructure. And I've evaluated a number of projects, and when you add in the infrastructure cost, it just, the costs get astronomical. So we're still trying to figure a way that we can help to address that. But yeah, we are looking at both heirs property, at settlement communities, and just regular landowners.
Thank you.
Ms. Woodward?
I just wanted to piggyback a little on what Duncan said in reference to LIHTC. I've worked on 2 in Charleston County, and when we worked on them as nonprofits, it was much easier. Now it is quite expensive. You have to spend so much money, and there's a possibility you won't even qualify for those projects, and you've lost as a nonprofit. You can't afford to lose $150,000, and you didn't meet it. So a lot of that has to do with the SC housing and how they present that, and that's why it's pushed Charleston County out, because of the qualifications and the new regulations. And they're really targeting whatever they do to large for-profit developers. And so that is where we need to start targeting, going to our state housing and talking with them about how they present those qualifications that they do. Secondly, in terms of zoning with habitat and what you might want to do, years ago, we put in some public water and sewer on Red Top and kind of went over that bridge to Marshfield Road. And we got county to do spot zoning until we could complete that project, and then it was removed. So maybe you might consider going to council and talking about doing some spot zoning just for where you want to develop. Back then, we had a much easier council to work with, but I will try anything to accomplish what we need to accomplish.
Mr. Porter, I forgot to ask, did you have a question?
I did. This might be one for Mr. Davis. What tools does the county, resources and tools does the county currently have to that's proven effective in your time here, short time?
Well, my time here has been really short.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, we are essentially, some of the things we've done is, I mean, we've purchased the houses from the Housing Authority to keep those affordable. And there was some money, was it shelters that went into? So there have been efforts, but they haven't been program related. Well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, because there have been some programs in terms of preservation, in terms of, emergency repairs for homeowners and those kind of things. But putting those things together into one big plan, was what this is all about. And I think that the issue of preservation, obviously, is going to be a big one. It's something the county has invested in. I think that's one of the tools that we have seen effective. So I think that's probably the biggest one at this point. But we are looking for more, obviously.
Mr. Riley?
I appreciate that. Just an earlier question I asked just about the assets that we do have in place, just access to that data. I don't know if it exists. I know there's been a lot of data gathering, who's producing what units. The purpose of me asking is just, starting from what are we doing well? What can we look at that's like these, and I only know anecdotally, I know, I look at the design on a UG Street affordable complex that the city housing authority is doing. It looks very beautiful. I don't know anything about the numbers of it. The Cooper site that was done is very beautiful. I know there's challenges with the, Joseph Floyd Manor. Then there's nonprofits like Metanoia and others that are doing this great work. It'd just be wonderful to know what is our starting point? What do we have now? What can we build off of and highlight as, hey, here's a model we can double down on as a group to sort of support what we do have, as opposed to trying to pull the fruit from the highest part of the tree. Let's start with what we have. So that's one question. The other comment is just, the way I see this body is that we're trying to embolden our political leaders to take a bigger stand on this issue and letting them feel that they have more confidence from the people that it's okay to do this. Right. And it's time. It's long overdue. I think one of the challenges, and I hear it in this conversation, I hear it in conversations around the country, with local governments, is a big challenge is sometimes we think we know what the people want, and the politicians think they know what people want, and the reality is we don't know. And that's because we actually don't have the data. And I heard it when the meeting started. It's like, well, we got to get the survey out to people that can't take digital surveys. It's not going to work. We're not going to get the survey to the people who we want to hear from. In that case, it's not going to happen. We've got here's a paper thing. Who's going to be in charge of getting this paper thing to people? And it's not going to work. And I've seen it happen across the country. And then what happens is you get this data back, and it's actually not reflective of the people. And then we start making comments. I heard in the room, it's just like, well, people don't want to see this. People don't want to see that. We actually don't know. What happens is the politicians think that they know because they're hearing from the vocal minority. And, it's just not representative of the community. And so they hear more of that from a few people and say, well, everyone doesn't want this. And that's just not the case. And I think that if we got real good data, what we would find is that people want the stuff that we're talking about right now. They want community. And I think I would hope that part of the work that this committee can do is really get the real data, because we need that to support the work we do, so we're not in the absence of that, because if we don't have it, we're not going to do as good of a job to embolden these politicians to do the bold stuff that we could do. And I hope that that's something that we can do together. Thank you.
The first part was the data on existing projects, and it's been very frustrating how difficult it is to get that kind of information here, more so than any place else I've been. We've been to SC Housing, we've been to the city of Charleston, and most of what we got back at this point is just a list of projects and not, no information on the financing, no information on the gaps that needed to be closed, anything like that. So we're still working on that. They're somewhat cooperative, so we expect to have that. Just didn't expect it to take this long. In terms of the real data, I mean, me and my entire staff here, we plan to beat the county dry, to make it to every single neighborhood in the county, to talk to everybody that's willing to be talked to. At one point, I was averaging, I think it was 6 to 8 public meetings a week, or 6 to 8 meetings with public people every week for 3 months. We had to dial that down to get some of these programs out there. But our next phase is actual public meetings that will happen in every part of the county. So, it may be an exercise in futility to get those paper surveys out there. I don't know, but we're going to try. But more importantly than that, like I said, is those personal visits, getting out to each one of the communities, understanding the nuances, and actually listening to people about what it is they want to see in their community.
And if I could just echo on that, I mean, I think that is something that we, on the consultant team side, and then just the entire team right now, have been talking about that. Yes, surveys are important because, to the extent that you can use a survey and push it out there, and there's broad kind of, there's broad messaging around that, and hopefully it raises some awareness. And sometimes it isn't just about the numbers that come from a survey. It's about the fact that, oh my gosh, the county's doing a survey and they're asking these kinds of questions. And so they're looking at this kind of an issue. Sometimes that's also as valid about a survey as it is the numbers that you get back. We try to say all the time that we don't plan by numbers. And so the survey is important, and it can validate certain issues, but I think it's also just as important to have these community conversations. And what I'll say is, this anecdotal information, the conversations we had with the 4 mayors this morning, and the stories they told about their constituents are very real and just as valid as the data. And so the point when Daryl and his team are out there having these community conversations, what they give back to us and the stories that they're hearing, and how that can frame how we, target some of these tools and use different strategies in different ways in different locations, that can be substantiated just by those community conversations as much as they would be by any sort of survey numbers. I think that's, I wanted to just kind of add that, because when I think about education, it's community conversations. We're going to be talking as a team about the possibility of putting out a series of videos that really, what are the 3 or 4 main issues that would be really great to educate the community on, and do, videos around that. Sometimes it's around, housing types, and why are we talking about all different kinds of housing type, and what does density look like, and talk about appropriate locations, because a lot of the density conversations also say density writ large everywhere, and it's like, well, that's not even what we would say. I think that would be terrible planning. It's not sustainable. It's not what we're talking about. So, where are good places to target that density? You could educate around that to start breaking down some of those, automatic anti kind of sentiments that can come up. And so community conversations, videos, we might do another very specific housing survey around some of these strategy components, let's say. You know, there's also, you know, we understand what the needs are. The data can tell us these community conversations are going to fill in the gaps and help us flesh out the experience. But all it does is really just sort of validating and fleshing out the experience. If we've started to do our analysis right and really dive in the way we have, it is fleshing out that experience and bringing those pieces together. We can craft some strategy around that. We don't need to have, you know, every low-income person say, hey, I need housing. We know there are low-income people that need housing, right? So I think it's just a matter of education awareness and trying to get people to understand kind of their role in this.
Mr. Chair, if I may have the last, not the last, but I believe that surveys are very important. And I believe that we need to be very creative on how we get them out. I attend almost every community meeting that is in my service area on a monthly basis. And I'm willing to take surveys to them at those meetings. Secondly, on this coming, I think it's Saturday and Sunday, there is a Black Festival food truck on the state park grounds. And I'm gonna tell you, when he had it in Mount Pleasant about 6 months ago, it was almost 10,000 people that showed up. Wow. This time, he has 20 trucks, and they expect it to overflow what they have met on the last time. I know the gentleman personally, and I can talk with him to see if tables can be set up, and we have your surveys there. It is amazing what the diversity of the people that will be there. And even if they don't need housing, they have ideas on who needs housing. Shauna, she sees all kinds of people. She probably will gonna get me afterwards because we are very limited in our staff. You know, she has a staff of 2. I have a staff of me. So, but I'm willing to do it because I believe that this is something that is very important, and we need to, and I said that just before coming here to a meeting, we need to hear what the people want. I was on a meeting with the homeless for the city of Charleston homeless, and they said they got 36 surveys, and they were happy that they got 36 surveys, and they had predicted only 10. And so, I said to them, okay, but all the surveys that you have, it does not address any of the people that we're trying to reach. So how are you going to reach those people to find out what they really want? Because we can sit here and say forever what we think they want, and it's completely different. So I'm willing to be a part of getting those surveys done. And I know I have 2 communities that I can just give those presidents copies of those surveys, and they will get them, they'll get someone on the committee to go door to door to get them done. So, I'm finished. I had said I was never gonna say so much today, but sometimes it's.
We're going to try to conclude this. Ms. Hunter, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just real quick, I don't want to restate anything that was said today. I feel like first of all, thank you for your presentation. It was amazing. But also, I feel like my peers have pretty much covered everything that I wanted to learn more about. I do want to know a little bit more about us working as a tri-county region. And I want to know the feedback that you received from the mayors today, or conversations that you had while you were here. I do think that it's evident that we're going to have to look at that as a tri-county region, because we've already seen people get moved out from the peninsula into North Charleston, into Somerville, and it's just going to continue to expand. And so that was my first question. And then to piggyback on what Ms. Henrietta was saying, I don't want you all to reinvent the wheel as far as storytelling. There is an organization here in Charleston called CAJM. And before I say that, I'd be remiss to not mention that Charleston specifically is called the Holy City. So if you're looking to get these surveys out to people, you're going to want to look at your churches and your faith-based organizations because they're going to have an impact like no other. And so I wanted to mention CAJM as well because they've been doing this work for years around housing, and I can get you their contact information, but they have stories. They've been interviewing people. They've interviewed, how I met Daryl Davis is through one of their interview series regarding housing. And I think you guys are you have a really great framework here. And I'm just excited to see us move forward, so, with the strategy.
Can I just say two things real quick?
Yeah.
Well, actually, just one thing, and just thinking about what has been said just in this last moment about outreach and surveys and getting to the community. That was the great conversation we were having with the mayors today. And we dove into tell us who in your community and how they are connecting and understanding. We built, I think, a very quick capacity roadmap of where we want to, where we should be connecting to get those on the ground, in the neighborhood, let's call it, in, conversations and those community conversations. So that was a big part of the conversation we had today. We spent a little bit of time talking about needs, but a lot of time talking about how do we continue these conversations in your, in your area. And yes, churches were brought up and, consortiums and we just kind of, like I said, started to put together, kind of this roadmap of this connected, this roadmap of being able to do that. So you'll see more of that from this team, going forward. So I just wanted to let you know that was a big part of the conversation today with the mayors, actually.
And just to be clear, we're well connected in with CAJM. I meet with Pastor Benton every other week. And so we have our spirited debates about different things, but yeah, they're definitely going to be a part of our efforts.
Yeah, Mr. Carney, I have a couple things I want to ask real quick. Which municipalities and which mayors did you meet with?
We met with Hollywood, Folly Beach, James Island, and I can't read Awandon. I can't read my chicken scratch here, and I had a yes.
And only the mayor of Awandon. The others were staff.
Yeah.
Right. But we met with the mayors of the three big cities prior to that.
Okay. Thank you. You mentioned a next visit. When are y'all planning a future visit?
I don't know if we have a future visit on the calendar. What I will say is on our agenda for our Friday debrief with the team is to talk about, if you're meeting the second Wednesday of each month, maybe, we join virtually if that's okay with the committee and I don't know, we don't have a set time to come back, and I think we can plan that time, if we can, around that second Wednesday time slot. It won't be next month, but it could be after. I don't know at this point, but we'll also entertain the idea of joining you all virtually and continuing the conversations that way. I think would be
I think that might be appropriate. I really appreciated the opportunity of tracts of land that might be utilized in the future. One thing, and this may be captured in a subcategory of the list that's on the screen here, but potential infill and redevelopment. As we continue to grow and build out, we're going to have to come back to a lot of these tracts and vacant buildings. So that would be something that if y'all could sort of capture and provide a little information, I think could be helpful. There was a great article in today's Post and Courier about the Piggly Wiggly site and that redevelopment. I think we need to talk more about public-private partnerships, using the public capacity and private sector going forward to utilize as much as we can going in the future. And then, again, I don't believe we need to create the wheel. To steal a Mr. Gregory-ism, we don't need to create the wheel, but we need something that'll roll. So I think just going forward, y'all are on a good track, and I appreciate what's been done so far. As far as the regular business, Mr. Davis, do we need to take up the minutes of last meeting? This isn't on the agenda, but
Oops, yes, that's my fault. I didn't put that on the agenda, but yes, we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Move for approval.
any discussion? Call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Mr. Durant, I see you're here. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Mr. Davis, do you care to finish with anything?
I think I've talked enough.
Okay. If that is the case, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.